The howling wind cut through Yellowstone National Park like a frozen blade, turning the familiar landscape into an alien terrain of white destruction. Marcus Reed pulled his heavy ranger coat tighter around his body, fighting against the merciless February storm that had caught the entire park off guard. His routine patrol had transformed into a battle for survival as the temperature plummeted to dangerous levels, forcing him to consider turning back to his cabin. The crackling of his radio only delivered static, a haunting reminder of his isolation in this vast wilderness, through the curtain of heavy snow. His trained eyes caught an unusual dark shape near a cluster of snow-covered pines, an anomaly in the otherwise pristine white landscape. Something about the way the shape moved, or rather, failed to move properly, triggered his instincts, developed over decades of wildlife observation. Marcus knew he should continue his path back to safety. But 20 years of ranger service had taught him that unusual patterns often meant an animal in distress. Approaching cautiously, his heart nearly stopped when he discovered a tiny wolf pup, no more than a few weeks old, its small body already growing stiff from the cold. The pup's left hind leg was badly wounded, likely from a coyote attack, and spots of blood stained the snow around it in a grotesque pattern. Marcus knew the protocol by heart. Nature should take its course, intervention was strictly forbidden, and wolf pups were especially off-limits given their protected status and the controversy surrounding their reintroduction to the park. Yet as he stood there, watching the small creature's labored breathing create tiny puffs of steam in the frigid air, Marcus felt the weight of his conscience pressing heavier than his duty. The thought of leaving this helpless being to die alone in the storm seemed more unnatural than any human intervention could ever be. Survival rates for wolf pups were already desperately low, and this one's chances were zero without immediate help. With trembling hands, more from emotion than cold, Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He gently wrapped the pup in his spare thermal blanket, carefully tucking the small body inside his coat, where his body heat could help stabilize the animal's temperature. The pup offered no resistance, too weak to fight or even whimper, its eyes barely opening to acknowledge its savior. Marcus knew he had less than an hour to get back to his cabin, before hypothermia became a serious threat to both of them. He could already feel the icy fingers of the wind finding every gap in his clothing, and the extra weight of the pup, though minimal, would slow his progress through the deep snow. Radio communication was completely dead now, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Marcus pushed through the worsening conditions, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to navigate when visibility dropped to mere feet. His legs burned from the effort of high-stepping through snow that now reached his thighs in places, and his lungs ached from breathing the sharp, cold air. Every few minutes he would feel for the pup's breathing, relieved to find the tiny chest still rising and falling against his own, after what felt like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes. The welcome sight of his cabin emerged from the white void like a miracle. Marcus had never been so grateful for the simple log structure that had been his home for the past 5 years. The pup stirred slightly as they crossed the threshold into warmth, and Marcus allowed himself his first real breath since finding the injured animal. As he gently placed the bundle on his kitchen table and began to unwrap it, Marcus knew his real challenges were just beginning. Saving this pup would require weeks of secret care, careful rehabilitation, and a constant vigilance to avoid detection by other park rangers. He would be risking his career, his reputation, and possibly legal consequences if discovered. Yet looking into the pup's eyes, which now opened fully for the first time to meet his gaze, Marcus felt a connection that transcended all rational concerns. He saw intelligence, fear, and a desperate will to live in those small golden eyes. As he began to clean the wound and prepare a makeshift splint, Marcus whispered a promise to the tiny wolf, one that would echo through the years in ways he could never imagine. "You're going to make it, little one. Whatever it takes, you're going to make it." The first night proved to be the most critical in the pup's survival. Marcus transformed his small living room into a makeshift veterinary clinic, using his limited first aid supplies and knowledge gained from years of wildlife observation. The wound was deep but clean, and after carefully disinfecting it, he managed to create a reasonable splint using materials from his emergency medical kit. The pup remained surprisingly calm throughout the procedure, only whimpering softly when Marcus touched the most sensitive areas. As he worked, Marcus couldn't help but notice the unique markings on the pup's face, a distinctive white patch above its right eye that formed an almost perfect crescent moon shape. He found himself talking softly to the animal, explaining each step of the treatment, more to calm his own nerves than to comfort the wolf. Morning brought new challenges as Marcus needed to maintain his regular patrol schedule. While caring for his secret patient, he converted an old storage box into a comfortable den. Lining it with soft blankets and placing it near the fireplace for warmth, the pup needed feeding every few hours, and Marcus had to get creative with the limited resources he had available. He remembered reading about wolf pup nutrition during his training and managed to create a suitable formula using supplies from his emergency food storage. Every time he prepared to leave for his duties, he found himself checking and double-checking that the pup was secure and comfortable, feeling an increasing sense of responsibility for this tiny life he had chosen to save. The guilt of breaking protocol warred constantly with his conviction that he had made the right choice. The radio crackled throughout the day with routine communications from other rangers, each transmission making Marcus tense with anxiety. His cabin was subject to random inspections, and discovery of the wolf pup would mean immediate termination at best, criminal charges at worst. He began keeping his medical logs separate from his official reports, documenting the pup's progress while maintaining his regular patrol records, as if nothing had changed. The duplicity wore on him, but every evening when he returned to find those golden eyes watching for him, the weight of his deception felt worth bearing. The pup's recovery was remarkable within days. It was accepting food eagerly and attempting to move around despite the splintered leg. Marcus found himself rushing through his duties, anxious to return and check on his patient's progress. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus developed a routine that balanced his official duties with the demands of caring for the injured pup. He named the wolf Shadow, both for its dark coat and the way it began following him around the cabin once it could walk. The name also served as a reminder of the secretive nature of their relationship. Shadow proved to be incredibly intelligent, quickly learning the boundaries Marcus set and showing remarkable restraint for such a young animal. During the quiet evening hours, Marcus would sit in his old armchair reading reports while Shadow lay nearby, occasionally raising his head to watch his caretaker with those intense golden eyes. These moments of peaceful coexistence began to fill a void in Marcus's life that he hadn't even realized was there. The transformation in both wolf and man became more apparent with each passing day. Shadow's wound healed cleanly, and his strength returned rapidly, but it was the changes in Marcus that proved more profound. The solitary ranger, known for his strict adherence to protocol and preference for isolation, found himself talking more, smiling more, and feeling more connected to the wilderness he protected than ever before. He knew the day would come when he would have to return Shadow to the wild, and the thought filled him with a complex mixture of sadness and pride. Every successful step in the pup's recovery was both a victory and a step closer to their inevitable separation. Marcus began to understand that saving Shadow wasn't just about preserving a life. It was about preserving something wild and pure in himself as well. 2 months into Shadow's recovery, the changes in both the wolf pup and the cabin's atmosphere were remarkable. The once tiny creature had grown significantly, his injured leg showing no signs of its previous trauma. As he bounded around the small living space with increasing energy, Marcus found himself rearranging furniture to accommodate Shadow's playful bursts, creating pathways through the cabin that allowed the growing pup to exercise without risking damage to either the wolf or the ranger's sparse belongings. The sound of claws clicking against wooden floors and the occasional playful growl had become a normal part of Marcus's daily life, filling the once silent cabin with a vibrant energy he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Despite his best efforts to maintain professional distance, Marcus caught himself spending more and more time simply observing Shadow. Fascinated by the pup's developing personality and intelligence, the challenge of keeping Shadow hidden grew more complex as the pup's energy levels increased. Marcus had to be constantly vigilant, especially during surprise visits from fellow rangers. He developed an elaborate warning system, training Shadow to retreat to a concealed space beneath the cabin's raised floor. Whenever specific signals were given, the wolf's intelligence continued to amaze him, as Shadow quickly learned to respond to various whistles and hand signals, showing an understanding that went beyond mere training. During these moments of forced hiding, Marcus could feel the pup's restraint, sensing how the young wolf suppressed its natural instincts to comply with his wishes. This level of trust and cooperation created a bond between them that grew stronger with each passing day. making the inevitable separation seem increasingly difficult to face. Weather conditions that spring were particularly harsh, with late snowstorms and unseasonable cold fronts extending winter's grip on the park. Marcus used these conditions to justify spending more time than usual at his cabin, documenting the extreme weather patterns as his official excuse. The extra time allowed him to focus on preparing Shadow for eventual release, teaching the growing pup essential survival skills. While carefully maintaining its natural wild instincts, he began bringing back small game he found during his patrols, using these opportunities to help Shadow develop hunting instincts that would be crucial for survival in the wild. The wolf's natural abilities emerged quickly, showing that despite their close bond, Shadow remained very much a wild animal at heart. The transformation in Marcus's own behavior didn't go unnoticed by his colleagues. His typically reserved demeanor had softened somewhat, and he found himself more engaged in conversations during their brief interactions. Fellow Ranger Sarah Chen commented on the change during one of her supply runs, noting that he seemed more at peace with himself. Marcus deflected these observations with practiced ease, attributing any changes to the approaching spring season. However, internally, he acknowledged that caring for Shadow had awakened something in him that had long been dormant. The simple act of protecting and nurturing another living being had given his solitary life new purpose and meaning, even as he knew their time together was limited. As spring began to truly take hold in the park, Marcus faced the growing reality that Shadow's time for release was approaching. The pup had grown into a strong young wolf, showing all the signs of being ready for life in the wild. During their evening routines, Marcus would watch Shadow staring out the cabin windows, tracking the movements of distant wildlife with increasing intensity. The wolf's natural instincts were calling, and Marcus knew he couldn't ignore them much longer. One evening, as they sat in their usual spots by the fire, Shadow's head suddenly jerked up at the sound of a distant wolf howl. The pup's immediate response, a slight whine and rigid posture, told Marcus everything he needed to know. It was time to begin planning for their farewell. The day Marcus chose for Shadow's release dawned clear and crisp. With spring firmly established in the park's lower elevations, he had selected the location carefully over the previous weeks, identifying an area where a stable wolf pack had been recently sighted, far enough from human activity to give Shadow the best chance at survival. The morning routine felt heavy with unspoken significance as Marcus prepared for their final journey together. He found himself moving slowly, deliberately, taking mental photographs of moments he knew would never come again. Shadow seemed to sense the importance of the day, watching Marcus's every move with those intelligent golden eyes now level with Marcus's hip when the wolf stood at full height. The distinctive white crescent above Shadow's eye had remained, making him easily identifiable among other wolves, a fact that both worried and comforted Marcus. The drive to the release site was made in complete silence, broken only by the occasional bump of the ranger vehicle over rough terrain. Marcus had chosen to transport Shadow in the cabin of his truck rather than the cargo area, a final gesture of companionship that violated yet another protocol. The young wolf sat calmly in the passenger seat, occasionally pressing against Marcus's arm as if seeking reassurance. They passed through areas of the park Marcus rarely visited, moving deeper into the wilderness where human intervention was minimal. The chosen spot lay near a natural meadow, bordered by dense forest and a clear stream, perfect wolf territory. As they approached their destination, Marcus found his hands tightening on the steering wheel, his heart growing heavier with each mile that brought them closer to goodbye. Parking the vehicle at the end of an old service road, Marcus took a moment to complete his final preparations. He had brought some of Shadow's favorite food, not to feed him but to leave as a familiar scent in the area while the wolf adjusted to his new surroundings. Setting up a small monitoring station would allow him to observe Shadow's initial transition without direct interference. As he worked, Shadow explored the immediate area, his movements showing increasing confidence and interest in the new environment. The wolf's behavior shifted subtly, becoming more alert and focused on the wilderness around them. Marcus watched as natural instincts began to override months of domestication, a process both beautiful and painful to witness. The transformation happening before his eyes confirmed that he had made the right decision, both in saving Shadow and in releasing him now. The actual moment of release proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. After setting up his observation point, he knelt beside Shadow one last time, running his hand through the thick fur that had grown so familiar. The wolf stood perfectly still, allowing the touch while his eyes scanned the forest ahead, ears twitching at every new sound. Marcus had prepared himself for this moment, had rehearsed it in his mind countless times, but the reality struck him with unexpected force. He removed the simple collar he had used during their secret walks around the cabin, the last physical connection between them. Shadow turned to look at him then, and in those golden eyes, Marcus saw something that would stay with him forever. Recognition, trust, and a wild spirit that had never truly been tamed. With a gentle pat and a softly whispered, "Go on," Marcus stood and stepped back, giving Shadow the space to make his choice. What happened next became forever etched in Marcus's memory. Shadow took several steps forward, then paused, looking back at the man who had saved his life. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still as they regarded each other across the growing distance. Then, a distant wolf howl echoed through the trees, and Shadow's head snapped toward the sound. The young wolf's entire body tensed, ancient instincts awakening fully. With one final glance at Marcus, Shadow turned and loped into the forest, his dark fur blending seamlessly with the shadows between the trees. Marcus watched until the last trace of movement disappeared, then forced himself to walk back to his truck. He didn't allow himself to look back again, knowing that this chapter of his life had come to its necessary end. As he drove away, the forest seemed somehow different, not emptier, but fuller, knowing that somewhere within it, a part of his heart now ran wild and free. The years following Shadow's release moved with the steady rhythm of seasons that marked life in Yellowstone. Marcus maintained his routine as a ranger. Though the silence in his cabin never quite felt natural again, he kept track of wolf pack movements in the area where he had released Shadow, paying special attention to reports of wolves with distinctive markings. Through official channels and casual conversations with other rangers, he gathered fragments of information about a wolf matching Shadow's description. The reports painted a picture of a strong, capable predator who had successfully integrated into one of the local packs. Each confirmation of Shadow's survival brought Marcus a quiet satisfaction, validating his decision to intervene that stormy winter day. The occasional glimpse of a dark wolf with a white crescent mark during his patrols would send his heart racing, though he maintained his professional distance, never acknowledging their shared history. As 5 years stretched into 10, Marcus's life underwent its own gradual transformation. The experience with Shadow had softened something in him, making him more receptive to human connections. He began accepting dinner invitations from fellow rangers, sharing his extensive knowledge of wolf behavior with new recruits, and even leading educational programs for park visitors. His reputation shifted from that of the stern, solitary ranger to a respected mentor and authority on wildlife behavior. The story of finding an injured wolf pup remained his closely guarded secret, but the lessons learned from those months of caring for Shadow influenced every aspect of his work. He became known for his nuanced approach to wildlife management, advocating for careful consideration of each situation rather than rigid adherence to protocol. His superiors noticed the change, and his influence within the Park Service grew. The decision to retire came gradually, prompted by the increasing strain of winter patrols on his aging body. After 25 years of service, Marcus chose to settle in a small cabin just outside the park boundaries in Montana. The location offered him the solitude he still craved, while keeping him connected to the wilderness that had shaped his life. He took up wildlife photography, using his intimate knowledge of animal behavior to capture remarkable images of wolves and other park residents. His photographs began appearing in nature magazines, accompanied by articles sharing his insights into wolf behavior. Though he never explicitly mentioned Shadow, his unique understanding of wolf psychology shone through in every piece he wrote. The work kept him connected to the park and its inhabitants, allowing him to maintain the delicate balance between involvement and distance that had defined his career. Life in retirement suited Marcus well, providing a new rhythm that matched his slower pace. He spent his days hiking the surrounding wilderness, photographing wildlife, and maintaining his modest cabin. The isolation that had once been a shield became a comfortable choice, allowing him to live on his own terms while staying connected to the natural world he loved. He developed a reputation among local photographers and naturalists as a source of wisdom about wolf behavior. Though he always deflected questions about the source of his insights, the years of keeping Shadow's secret had taught him the value of holding certain stories close, letting them shape his actions rather than his words. His cabin walls gradually filled with photographs of wolves, each image capturing a moment of wild freedom that reminded him of his own brief time as caretaker to one of these magnificent creatures. Changes in the park ecosystem became more noticeable as the years passed. Climate shifts altered migration patterns, and human encroachment continued to pressure the delicate balance of wildlife populations. Marcus watched these changes with concern, using his photography and writing to document the impacts on wolf packs and their prey. He occasionally heard rumors of a particularly successful wolf pack led by a large dark male with unusual markings, operating in the area where he had released Shadow. Though he could never be certain it was the same wolf, the stories gave him hope that his small act of mercy had rippled outward, contributing to the resilience of Yellowstone's wolf population as he entered his 15th year of retirement. Marcus had no way of knowing that his connection to Shadow was about to come full circle in a way he could never have anticipated. Spring arrived late that year, with winter stubbornly maintaining its grip on the Montana wilderness. Marcus, now 70 years old, had grown accustomed to the rhythms of retirement. But something about this particular season felt different. The unusual weather patterns reminded him of that fateful winter 15 years ago when he had found Shadow. His joints ached more these days, especially when storms approached, yet he maintained his habit of daily walks through the surrounding forest. On this particular morning, despite the threatening clouds gathering on the horizon, Marcus decided to proceed with his planned hike to a nearby ridge where he had set up a wildlife photography blind. The forecast mentioned a possibility of snow, but he had weathered countless storms during his years as a ranger and felt confident in his ability to read the weather. The first few hours passed pleasantly enough as Marcus photographed early spring wildlife emerging from winter's grip. The blind he had constructed offered excellent views of a natural game trail, and he managed to capture several promising shots of elk and moose moving through the area as the morning wore on. However, the weather began to deteriorate more rapidly than predicted. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind picked up, bringing with it the first flakes of what quickly became heavy snow. Marcus began packing his equipment, knowing he needed to start back before conditions worsened, but the storm's intensity increased faster than he had anticipated. Within minutes, visibility dropped dramatically, and the familiar landscape transformed into a disorienting white void. The parallels to that day 15 years ago were not lost on him, though this time he was the one in danger. The descent from the ridge proved treacherous, as accumulating snow concealed the trail markers Marcus typically relied upon. His experience told him to maintain his course downhill, but the strengthening wind and deepening snow made each step hazardous. About halfway down, disaster struck. A snow-covered root caught his foot, sending him tumbling down a steep section of the trail. The fall ended with a sickening crack as his leg struck a partially buried log. The pain was immediate and intense, and Marcus knew instantly that he was in serious trouble. His cell phone had no signal in this remote area, and his emergency beacon was in his cabin, a safety precaution he had grown lax about carrying as the snow continued to fall and the temperature dropped further. Marcus faced the grim reality that he had made a potentially fatal error in judgment. Drawing on his years of wilderness experience, he began to drag himself toward a rocky overhang he remembered was nearby. Knowing his survival depended on finding shelter from the intensifying storm, the next hours became a brutal test of endurance as Marcus fought to maintain consciousness and stay warm. He managed to reach the overhang, which provided some protection from the wind and snow, but the growing cold posed a lethal threat. His injured leg throbbed relentlessly, and he could feel the early stages of hypothermia setting in despite his well-insulated clothing. As darkness approached, Marcus found himself thinking about Shadow, wondering if the wolf had faced similar challenges in the years since their parting. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, he had saved a wolf in a snowstorm, and now he faced his own mortality in strikingly similar conditions. The sound of the wind took on an almost musical quality as his consciousness began to fade, and Marcus realized with a detached clarity that without help, he would not survive the night. The howl that pierced through the storm's fury barely registered in Marcus's hypothermia-addled mind. At first, he dismissed it as another trick of the wind, like the many phantom sounds that had teased his failing consciousness over the past hours. But this sound was different, closer, more deliberate. Through the swirling snow, a dark shape emerged, moving with purposeful grace despite the brutal conditions. Marcus's frozen muscles tensed instinctively as he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of a wolf. The animal was massive, its dark coat dusted with snow, and as it drew closer, Marcus's heart nearly stopped. There, above the wolf's right eye, was a distinctive white crescent mark that had haunted his memories for 15 years. The rational part of his mind argued that this was impossible, that even if this was Shadow, no wild wolf would remember a human after so many years. Yet those eyes, those familiar golden eyes, held the same intelligent gaze he remembered from long ago. The wolf approached cautiously, its behavior unlike anything Marcus had witnessed in his decades of wildlife observation. There was recognition in its movements, a deliberate gentleness that defied wild animal behavior. The massive creature came within feet of Marcus's shelter, sniffing the air and making soft whining sounds that carried clearly despite the howling wind. Then, to Marcus's astonishment, the wolf lay down beside him, pressing its warm body against his frozen limbs. The heat emanating from the animal's fur began to combat the deadly cold that had been seeping into Marcus's bones. More remarkably, the wolf began making short, sharp barks, a behavior Marcus had never observed in wild wolves. These weren't normal vocalizations. They seemed almost like calls for help. Through his diminishing consciousness, Marcus realized that Shadow, if this indeed was Shadow, was trying to keep him alive. The absurdity of the situation struck him, even as he felt himself slipping deeper into the cold's embrace. What happened next seemed to unfold like a dream sequence. More wolves appeared through the curtain of snow, materializing like spirits from the storm. They moved with the coordinated precision of a pack. Surrounding Marcus and his unlikely guardian, the newcomers maintained a respectful distance, clearly deferring to the large wolf with the crescent mark. Marcus's professional knowledge told him this must be Shadow's pack, and judging by their behavior, the pup he had saved had become their alpha. The wolves' presence created a barrier against the wind, and their combined body heat began to warm the small space under the overhang. Some primal part of Marcus's mind recognized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. A wolf pack, led by an animal he had once saved, was now working to save him. The irony would have made him laugh if he had the strength. Instead, he drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warm presence beside him and the steady rhythm of Shadow's breathing. Time lost all meaning as the storm raged on. Marcus floated in a state between waking and dreaming, his memories of the young wolf he had nursed back to health, blending with the reality of the powerful alpha now guarding him. Through his haze, he became aware of new sounds cutting through the storm, human voices calling his name. The search party he hadn't dared hope for had somehow found him. Despite the impossible conditions, as flashlight beams cut through the darkness, Marcus felt Shadow stir beside him. The wolf rose to its feet, and for one brief moment, their eyes met. In that gaze, Marcus saw everything: gratitude, intelligence, and a connection that transcended the natural order. Then, with a soft whine that seemed almost like farewell, Shadow melted into the darkness, his pack following silently behind him. When the rescuers finally reached Marcus, they found him alone but alive, protected from the worst of the storm by the rocky overhang. The only evidence of his guardians was a set of wolf tracks, already filling with fresh snow. The search party leaders would later report how they had been drawn to Marcus's location by unusual wolf activity in the area. They described seeing a large dark wolf that seemed to be deliberately attracting their attention, leading them toward the overhang before disappearing into the storm. Marcus listened to their account from his hospital bed, saying nothing about recognizing the wolf or their shared history. Some stories, he knew, were too extraordinary for others to understand, too precious to be dissected and analyzed by those who hadn't experienced them. His official statement simply noted that he had found shelter and managed to survive until rescue arrived. But in private, Marcus knew the truth. 15 years after he had saved a wolf pup from death in a winter storm, that same wolf had returned the favor, settling a debt that Marcus had never expected to be repaid. The hospital room felt confining after the vast wilderness Marcus had nearly died in, but his injuries demanded proper medical attention. His broken leg required surgery, and the doctors were concerned about lasting effects from his hypothermia exposure. During his recovery, Marcus found himself becoming something of a local celebrity. Word of his survival spread through the community, embellished with each retelling. The story of wolves protecting a human during a blizzard captured people's imaginations. Though few believed it had actually happened, journalists began calling, seeking interviews about his extraordinary experience, but Marcus deflected their inquiries with practiced ease. He knew that telling the full story would mean revealing his long-ago violation of park protocols, and more importantly, it would mean sharing something he preferred to keep private. The truth of what had happened that night felt too personal, too sacred to be turned into a sensational headline. Sarah Chen, his former colleague from the Park Service, visited him regularly during his recovery. Now the head ranger at Yellowstone, she brought reports of wolfpack activities that she knew would interest him. During one visit, she mentioned unusual behavior observed in the pack, led by the dark wolf with the crescent marking. The pack had been spotted multiple times near the boundaries of human settlement, behavior uncharacteristic of wolves that typically avoided human contact. Marcus listened intently, but maintained his poker face. Even when Sarah described how this particular pack seemed different from others she had studied, their social structure was more complex, their hunting strategies more sophisticated, and their territorial marking patterns suggested an unusual level of intelligence. She attributed these differences to successful adaptation, but Marcus recognized them as Shadow's influence, the result of early exposure to human problem-solving. During those crucial developmental months, physical therapy became Marcus's new daily routine, replacing his beloved forest walks. His therapist, a young woman named Maya, showed remarkable patience as he worked to regain his strength and mobility. During their sessions, she would often ask about his years as a ranger. Genuinely interested in his wildlife experiences, Marcus found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his stories, always skating around the truth about Shadow. Yet something about Maya's sincere curiosity and compassionate nature made him want to tell her more. One day, after a particularly challenging session when frustration threatened to overwhelm him, he found himself speaking about connection, about how sometimes the wild things we try to save end up saving us instead. Maya seemed to understand the deeper meaning behind his words, never pushing for details, but offering quiet support as he worked through both physical and emotional healing. Her presence helped make the long hours of rehabilitation more bearable, reminding him that human connections could be as meaningful as those forged with the wilderness. The doctors told Marcus he would walk again, but that he should expect limitations. The news hit hard for someone who had spent his life roaming the wilderness. Yet he found himself focusing not on what he had lost, but on what he had gained. The experience had shown him that his connection to the natural world ran deeper than physical presence. It was embedded in his very being. During sleepless nights in the hospital, he would replay the memory of Shadow's return. Marveling at the intricate web of loyalty and reciprocity that existed in nature, he began keeping a private journal, documenting not just his recovery, but also his thoughts about that night in the storm. Writing helped him process the experience, turning it from something almost mythical into something he could understand and accept. The journal became his confidant, the only place where he allowed himself to explore the full depth of what had happened between him and Shadow. Recovery proved to be a gradual process, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. The medical staff noted Marcus's remarkable resilience, attributing it to his years of outdoor living and strong constitution. What they couldn't see was the inner strength he drew from knowing he had been part of something extraordinary. Each time he pushed through pain during physical therapy, he thought of Shadow, the injured pup who had fought to survive, the alpha wolf who had returned to save him. The experience had changed him in profound ways, deepening his understanding of the connections that bound all living things. As spring turned to summer outside his hospital window, Marcus began planning his return home, knowing that while he might not be able to hike the ridges as he once had, his relationship with the wilderness had evolved into something even more meaningful than before. Returning to his cabin after 3 months of hospitalization and rehabilitation brought Marcus face to face with how his life would need to change. The steep trail he had once navigated easily now presented a formidable challenge with his cane and partially healed leg. Maya, who had become more than just his physical therapist, helped him modify his living space to accommodate his new limitations. They installed handrails, rearranged furniture for better mobility, and set up a more accessible photography workspace near the windows. During these modifications, Marcus found himself sharing more stories about his years in the wilderness, carefully weaving in elements of his experience with Shadow without revealing the full truth. Maya listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights that suggested she understood more than he was saying. Her presence brought a warmth to the cabin that reminded him of those months long ago when another unlikely companion had shared his space. The local wildlife seemed to sense the change in Marcus's routine. Birds began frequenting new feeders placed within view of his workspace, and deer ventured closer to his cabin than ever before. But it was the wolves that commanded his attention. Through his telephoto lens, he documented the movements of Shadow's pack as they patrolled the edges of their territory. The pack's behavior continued to fascinate him, showing patterns that defied conventional understanding of wolf social structures. They maintained a closer proximity to human settlements than other packs, yet never caused problems with livestock or humans. Marcus recognized Shadow's influence in their behavior, a unique blend of wild instinct and learned adaptation. His photographs of the pack, particularly those capturing Shadow's distinctive profile, began attracting attention from wildlife magazines and researchers interested in wolf behavior. Without revealing his personal connection, Marcus used these opportunities to advocate for better understanding between humans and wildlife. Sarah's regular visits took on new significance as she shared updates about wolf pack activities in the region. She noticed Marcus's particular interest in Shadow's pack, but attributed it to professional curiosity rather than personal history. During one visit, she brought news that surprised even Marcus. The pack had begun exhibiting protective behavior toward humans in distress. There were reports of lost hikers being guided to safety by wolves. Though most dismissed these stories as tall tales, Marcus listened with careful neutrality, but internally his mind raced with the implications. Shadow hadn't just remembered him. The wolf had passed on some form of understanding to its pack. The relationship between humans and wild animals was proving more complex than even his years of experience had led him to believe. These revelations forced Marcus to reconsider everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior and interspecies connections. The months of recovery brought unexpected gifts along with the challenges. Unable to hike deep into the wilderness, Marcus developed a deeper appreciation for the small dramas unfolding around his cabin. His photography evolved, capturing intimate moments of wildlife behavior that he might have missed in his previous, more mobile life. The forced stillness taught him to see differently, to notice patterns and relationships he had overlooked before. He began writing more extensively about his observations, weaving together decades of experience with his new insights. Though he never explicitly wrote about Shadow, the wolf's influence colored every word. His articles began attracting attention not just for their technical expertise, but for their unique perspective on the relationship between humans and wild animals. Readers commented on his ability to convey the intelligence and complexity of wolf behavior, never knowing that his insights came from a personal experience that defied conventional wisdom. Maya continued to visit long after her professional obligations ended, helping Marcus adapt to his new normal while providing companionship that filled a void he hadn't acknowledged. During their conversations, she would often challenge his traditional views on wildlife management, pushing him to consider new perspectives on human-animal interactions. These discussions helped Marcus process his own extraordinary experience, though he still kept the full story to himself. One evening, as they watched the sunset from his porch, Maya asked him directly about the wolves that had saved him during the storm. Instead of his usual deflection, Marcus found himself sharing carefully chosen pieces of the truth, testing the waters of trust. Her response, quiet understanding without judgment, suggested that perhaps some stories, while too extraordinary for the world at large, could be shared with the right person. As summer faded into autumn, Marcus's life settled into a new rhythm that balanced his limitations with his ongoing connection to the wilderness. His photography work had evolved, focusing more on the intimate details of wildlife behavior observable from his property and its immediate surroundings. The forced change in perspective had unexpectedly enhanced his work, drawing praise from editors and fellow photographers for its unique intimacy. Through his lens, he continued to document Shadow's pack, noting how their territory consistently included his cabin area, despite more profitable hunting grounds elsewhere. The wolves' presence felt like a conscious choice, a deliberate maintenance of connection that defied natural behavior patterns. On quiet evenings, he would sometimes hear their howls closer than other packs would venture, a reminder of an unspoken bond that transcended ordinary human-wildlife relationships. Maya's regular visits had become an integral part of Marcus's weekly routine. their relationship evolving beyond the boundaries of therapist and patient into a deep friendship. She brought with her a fresh perspective on wildlife conservation that challenged his traditional views while respecting his experience. During one particularly meaningful conversation, she shared her own theory about why certain animals seem to form extraordinary connections with humans. Her background in behavioral science, combined with a genuine respect for the mysteries of nature, allowed her to consider possibilities that Marcus's ranger training had taught him to dismiss. As they discussed the complex intelligence of wolves, Marcus found himself closer than ever to sharing the full truth about Shadow. The weight of keeping such an extraordinary secret for so many years had begun to feel less like protection and more like a barrier to understanding something profound about the relationship between humans and wildlife. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during an early morning photography session. Marcus had set up his equipment on the cabin's porch, hoping to capture the autumn mist rising from the valley below. As the sun began to pierce the fog, he noticed movement at the forest's edge. Through his lens, he watched in amazement as Shadow emerged into the clearing. Alone and seemingly at ease, the wolf's age showed in the grey, starting to frost his muzzle, but his bearing remained powerful, regal. For several minutes, Shadow stood at the forest's edge, golden eyes fixed on the cabin's porch where Marcus sat motionless behind his camera. Then, in a gesture that seemed deliberately meaningful, the wolf lowered his head in what appeared to be a nod before melting back into the forest. Maya, who had arrived early that morning and witnessed the entire scene, broke the silence with a simple observation. "He came to check on you." The moment marked a turning point in Marcus's ability to share his story. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Marcus finally revealed the full history of his relationship with Shadow. He spoke of the storm 15 years ago, the secret rehabilitation, the difficult release, and the miraculous reunion that had saved his life. Maya listened without interruption, her scientific mind processing the implications while her heart understood the deeper truth of the connection Marcus described. When he finished, she shared her own observations about the unusual behavior of Shadow's pack, suggesting that perhaps this single act of compassion had created ripples that affected not just one wolf, but an entire pack's understanding of humans. The conversation lasted deep into the night, exploring the possibilities of what this could mean for our understanding of wildlife intelligence and interspecies relationships. For the first time, Marcus felt the freedom of having shared his secret with someone who could appreciate both its scientific significance and its personal meaning. Through Maya's encouragement, Marcus began to consider how he might share aspects of his experience in a way that could contribute to wildlife conservation without compromising Shadow's safety or his own professional reputation. They discussed the possibility of writing a book that would weave together his years of wildlife observation with carefully chosen elements of his personal experience, presenting it in a way that would encourage readers to reconsider traditional boundaries between humans and wildlife. The project gave Marcus a new sense of purpose, a way to transform his extraordinary experience into something that might benefit both wolves and humans as they developed the idea. Marcus realized that Maya had become more than just a sounding board or friend. She had become a partner in understanding and sharing a truth that had the power to change how people viewed their relationship with the natural world. The process of writing the book became a journey of self-discovery for Marcus, revealing layers of understanding about his experiences that he hadn't fully processed before. Maya's background in behavioral science helped frame his observations in ways that would resonate with both scientific and general audiences. They spent countless hours crafting a narrative that would challenge conventional wisdom about wildlife behavior without directly revealing Shadow's full story. Instead, they wove together carefully selected anecdotes from Marcus's decades of experience, building a case for more nuanced understanding of wolf intelligence and emotional capacity. The book took shape as both a memoir and a serious examination of human-wildlife relationships, with Maya's contributions adding crucial scientific context to Marcus's field observations. Their collaboration deepened their personal connection, as they found themselves sharing not just ideas, but a vision for how humans might better understand and coexist with wild creatures. Winter arrived again, bringing with it memories of both crisis and salvation. Marcus's leg had healed enough for short walks, though he still relied on a cane for stability. During one of their regular observation sessions, they witnessed an extraordinary scene that would become the book's central metaphor. Shadow's pack had successfully taken down an elk, and instead of the typical hierarchical feeding pattern, they displayed an unusual level of cooperation in sharing the kill. Even more remarkably, they left a portion of the meat uneaten, behavior that Marcus had observed repeatedly over the years but had never fully understood until now. Maya suggested that Shadow's early experience of being cared for had influenced not just his own behavior, but had fundamentally altered the social dynamics of his entire pack. This observation became a cornerstone of their book's thesis about the far-reaching effects of compassion across species boundaries. Sarah's unexpected visit one snowy afternoon added another layer to their developing manuscript. She brought news that the Park Service was revising its wildlife management policies, partly in response to growing evidence of complex social behaviors in wolf packs. Without realizing it, she confirmed many of the theories Marcus and Maya had been developing about the evolution of wolf behavior in response to human interaction. The conversation turned to the increasing frequency of positive wolf-human encounters in the region, most involving Shadow's pack. Sarah attributed this to successful conservation efforts, but Marcus and Maya exchanged knowing glances, understanding that they were witnessing the ripple effects of a single act of kindness extending across 15 years and multiple generations of wolves. The implications were both profound and challenging to their understanding of wildlife behavior. That evening, after Sarah left, they worked late into the night, incorporating these new insights into their manuscript. As the book neared completion, Marcus struggled with how to conclude the narrative. He wanted to honor both the scientific significance of his observations and the deeply personal nature of his connection with Shadow, without compromising either. The solution came during another dawn photography session, when they observed Shadow's pack teaching their youngest members to hunt. The scene perfectly illustrated their book's central theme, that wisdom and compassion could be passed down through generations. Transcending the boundaries between species, Maya helped Marcus craft a conclusion that challenged readers to reconsider their assumptions about wildlife, while maintaining the mystery that made such connections profound. The final chapter acknowledged that some experiences defied scientific explanation, while still contributing valuable insights to our understanding of the natural world. Through careful writing and Maya's scientific guidance, they created a work that would educate and inspire, without exposing the full extent of Marcus's extraordinary relationship with Shadow. The publication of Marcus and Maya's book, Wisdom of the Wild, New Perspectives on Wolf Behavior, created ripples throughout the wildlife conservation community. Its unique blend of personal observation and scientific analysis challenged established views about wolf intelligence and social behavior. While some traditional researchers questioned their conclusions, others found their work opened new avenues for studying animal cognition and interspecies relationships. The book's success brought increased attention to their corner of Montana, leading to the establishment of a small research station dedicated to studying wolf pack dynamics. Maya took charge of the project, ensuring that all research was conducted with minimal interference in the wolves' natural behavior. Marcus served as a senior advisor, his decades of experience providing invaluable guidance, while allowing him to maintain a comfortable distance from the academic politics that often surrounded such projects. Their professional partnership continued to deepen, as did their personal relationship, which had grown into something neither had expected, but both treasured. One crisp autumn morning, during a routine observation session, they witnessed something extraordinary. Shadow's pack had welcomed a new generation of pups, and through their spotting scopes, they observed an unprecedented level of social learning taking place. The older wolves weren't just teaching hunting skills, they were demonstrating complex problem-solving behaviors that Marcus recognized from his time with Shadow. Most remarkably, they observed the pack working together to help an injured member, showing a level of cooperation and care that went beyond typical wolf behavior. Maya's scientific training helped them document these observations in a way that would be credible to the research community, while Marcus's intimate knowledge of wolf behavior provided context for understanding the significance of what they were seeing. Their findings suggested that Shadow's influence had created a unique culture within his pack, one that combined wild instincts with learned behaviors that promoted survival through cooperation, rather than just competition. The arrival of winter brought new challenges and revelations. Shadow, now showing his age more visibly, had begun gradually ceding leadership responsibilities to a younger wolf, one that bore a striking resemblance to him. including a similar white marking above its right eye. Marcus and Maya spent hours observing this transition of power, noting how it differed from typical wolf pack succession. Instead of the usual confrontational challenge for dominance, they witnessed what appeared to be a planned and peaceful transfer of leadership. This process, unprecedented in documented wolf behavior, became the subject of a new paper they collaborated on. Though they carefully avoided speculation about its origins in Shadow's unique history, their work continued to push the boundaries of wildlife research while maintaining the delicate balance between scientific observation and respect for the mysteries of nature. Through their spotting scopes, they watched as Shadow's legacy took shape in the form of a new generation of wolves that exhibited extraordinary social intelligence and adaptability. The impact of their research extended beyond the academic community. Local ranchers reported a decrease in wolf livestock conflicts, particularly in areas where Shadow's pack maintained territory. The pack's hunting patterns showed a clear preference for wild prey, and they exhibited unusual skill in avoiding human confrontation while maintaining their territory near populated areas. Maya's research station began developing new guidelines for wolf management based on these observations. Promoting coexistence rather than conflict, Marcus found himself increasingly called upon to share his expertise with conservation groups and park services across the country. Though he always maintained the privacy of his personal connection to the story, their work was gradually changing perceptions about wolf behavior and intelligence, suggesting that these animals were capable of far more sophisticated social learning and adaptation than previously believed. As they documented the continuing evolution of Shadow's pack, Marcus and Maya realized they were witnessing not just the legacy of one extraordinary wolf, but the emergence of a new understanding of the potential for harmony between humans and wildlife. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it both renewal and change. Marcus and Maya had settled into a comfortable routine of research, writing, and quiet evenings spent discussing their observations. Their relationship had deepened into a partnership that bridged the gap between scientific observation and spiritual connection with the natural world. One particularly memorable morning, while conducting their regular observations, they noticed unusual activity in Shadow's pack. The wolves were exhibiting behavior that suggested they were preparing for a significant change. Shadow, now visibly aged, but still commanding respect within the pack, had been seen less frequently at the forefront of hunting parties. His son, the new leader, had fully embraced his role while maintaining many of the unique behavioral traits that had made his father's pack so extraordinary. Marcus felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if nature itself was preparing for something momentous. The event they had unconsciously been preparing for came during a mild evening in early April. Marcus was alone on his porch, Maya having left for a conference in Seattle, when he noticed movement at the forest's edge. Shadow emerged from the trees, moving slowly but with deliberate purpose. The old wolf's coat had grown silver with age, but his eyes still held the same intelligent gleam that Marcus remembered from their first encounter 15 years ago. For a long moment, wolf and man regarded each other across the clearing. Then, with a grace that defied his years, Shadow began making his way toward the cabin. Marcus's heart raced as he realized what was happening. This was no casual visit. The wolf that had once been a rescued pup, that had later saved his life, was coming to say goodbye. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on Marcus, who remained perfectly still as Shadow approached closer than he had ever come since his days as a pup. Shadow stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Marcus with those familiar golden eyes in that gaze. In that, Marcus saw a lifetime of shared experiences, the storm that had brought them together, the months of secret healing, the years of distant watching, and the night of salvation in the blizzard. Without conscious thought, Marcus slowly descended the steps, his cane forgotten against the railing. Shadow waited patiently, showing no fear or aggression, just a calm acceptance of this final meeting. When Marcus reached the bottom step, Shadow moved forward and gently pressed his head against Marcus's outstretched hand, a gesture that bridged 15 years of separation in a single touch. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly, holding within it all the mystery and beauty of the connection between humans and the wild world. Then, with the same deliberate grace that had marked his approach, Shadow turned and walked back toward the forest, pausing once to look back before disappearing into the gathering dusk. That night the mountains echoed with an unprecedented chorus of wolf howls, a sound so powerful and mournful that it drew the attention of researchers and locals alike. Maya, returning early from her conference after Marcus's phone call, arrived in time to document the event. The entire pack had gathered on a ridge visible from Marcus's cabin, their voices raised in what could only be described as a farewell ceremony. Through their spotting scope, they could see Shadow's son leading the chorus, his own crescent marking clearly visible in the moonlight. The evening became a testament to something rarely witnessed, the passing of a wild creature whose life had bridged the divide between wilderness and humanity. Marcus and Maya stayed up all night, recording the event and sharing quiet reflections on the nature of connection, loss, and legacy. By morning, they knew that Shadow had made his final journey into the wilderness, leaving behind a transformed pack and an enduring lesson about the capacity for understanding between species. His life had changed, not just Marcus's understanding of wolves, but had rippled outward to influence scientific research, conservation practices, and most importantly, the way humans viewed their relationship with the wild world. The news of Shadow's passing spread through the wildlife research community in waves of quiet reverence. While few knew the full story of his connection to Marcus, his influence on wolf behavior studies had become legendary. Maya's research station documented how the pack adapted to his absence, noting that the sophisticated social structures and unique behaviors he had established continued under his son's leadership. The new alpha maintained his father's legacy of intelligent interaction with human settlements, leading his pack with a remarkable combination of wild instinct and learned wisdom. Marcus spent long hours observing these transitions, seeing in each generation the echoes of that first act of compassion 15 years ago. The regular reports from field researchers continued to reveal new aspects of the pack's unusual behavior, each discovery adding to the growing body of evidence that wolf intelligence and emotional capacity far exceeded traditional scientific understanding. Marcus finally felt ready to share more of his story. Though still protecting its most private aspects, working with Maya, he began incorporating carefully chosen elements of his experience into their research papers and presentations. They focused on documenting the multi-generational effects of positive wolf-human interactions, using Shadow's pack as a case study without revealing the original catalyst for their unique behavior. The scientific community's response was profound, as their work challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior and adaptation. Their research suggested that single positive interactions could influence not just individual animals, but entire family groups across generations. This finding had significant implications for conservation strategies and wildlife management policies, leading to new approaches that emphasized coexistence over conflict. The success of these methods in reducing wolf-human conflicts provided practical validation of their theories. Maya's presence in Marcus's life had grown increasingly essential, their shared understanding of Shadow's legacy creating a bond that transcended professional collaboration. One evening, as they reviewed footage of the pack's younger members displaying the same remarkable behaviors they had documented in Shadow, Maya suggested they were witnessing more than just learned behavior. They were seeing the continuation of a story that had begun with a simple act of compassion in a snowstorm. Their discussion led to a deeper exploration of how individual choices could ripple through time, affecting not just their immediate circumstances, but creating lasting change in unexpected ways. Marcus found himself sharing more intimate details of his time with Shadow, while Maya offered insights that helped him understand the broader significance of his experience. Their relationship had evolved into a partnership that bridged the gap between scientific observation and personal connection with the natural world. The impact of their work continued to expand beyond academic circles. Conservation groups began implementing programs based on their research, focusing on fostering positive interactions between communities and local wildlife. The success of these initiatives, particularly in areas where Shadow's pack had demonstrated the possibility of peaceful coexistence, led to a gradual shift in public attitude toward wolves. Marcus found himself increasingly called upon to share his expertise with wildlife management teams across the country, though he always maintained the privacy of his personal connection to the story. As he watched new generations of wolves display the intelligence and adaptability that Shadow had pioneered, Marcus realized that his long-ago decision to save a wounded pup had set in motion changes that would continue long after both he and Shadow had passed from the scene. The legacy they shared had become something larger than either of them, a testament to the profound connections possible between humans and the wild world they shared. 10 years after Shadow's passing, Marcus sat on his cabin porch with Maya, now his wife, watching the sun set over the Montana wilderness. His hair had turned completely white, matching the snow-capped peaks in the distance, but his eyes remained sharp as he observed the familiar movement of wolves along the tree line. Shadow's grandson had taken leadership of the pack, carrying the same distinctive crescent marking that had become a symbol of their unique lineage. The pack's territory still included Marcus's cabin, maintaining a connection that spanned multiple generations of both wolves and humans. Through their continued research, Marcus and Maya had documented how the extraordinary behaviors first observed in Shadow's pack had become firmly established traits. Passed down through careful teaching from one generation to the next, their findings had revolutionized understanding of wolf intelligence and social learning, though the full story of how it all began remained known to only a select few. The research station Maya had established had grown into a respected center for wildlife behavior studies. Attracting scientists from around the world, their groundbreaking work on wolf social structures and interspecies relationships had influenced conservation policies across North America and Europe. Marcus's role had evolved into that of elder statesman, sharing his decades of experience with young researchers while maintaining the quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career. Together, he and Maya had created a legacy of their own, one that honored Shadow's memory by promoting understanding between humans and wildlife. Their research had helped establish new protocols for wildlife management that emphasized coexistence and respect rather than conflict and control. The success of these approaches, particularly in areas where Shadow's descendants roamed, provided living proof of their theories about the potential for harmony between wilderness and civilization. On this particular evening, as they reviewed their latest research data, a commotion at the forest's edge caught their attention. A young wolf, barely more than a pup, limped into view, clearly injured and struggling. Before they could react, they witnessed something extraordinary. 2 adult wolves from Shadow's pack appeared, gently guiding the injured youngster. Though it clearly wasn't one of their own, Marcus and Maya watched in amazement as the wolves led the pup to a sheltered area within view of the cabin. Demonstrating the same compassionate behavior that had marked their pack for generations, the scene struck Marcus with its profound symmetry. Here was Shadow's legacy coming full circle, his descendants showing the same mercy that had been shown to him so many years ago. The moment captured everything they had worked to understand and document about the capacity for learned kindness in wild animals. While adding a personal coda to a story that had begun in a long-ago snowstorm, as twilight deepened into night, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The choice he had made to save a wounded wolf pup had set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just his own life, but scientific understanding of wolf behavior and the potential for meaningful connections between humans and wildlife. His partnership with Maya had given him the framework to share these insights with the world, while their love had provided the support to maintain his sense of wonder at the mysteries they encountered. Together, they had built something that would continue beyond their own time, a legacy of understanding and respect for the intricate relationships between all living things. As the first stars appeared above the mountains, they heard the wolves begin their evening chorus, their howls carrying notes of the ancient wild, while demonstrating behaviors that suggested new possibilities for the future. In that moment, Marcus felt the completion of a circle that had begun 25 years ago with a simple act of compassion, knowing that its effects would continue to ripple outward through time, touching lives both human and wild in ways he could never have imagined.